I'm going to go ahead and just get started. We're starting to see some folks. If you all want to, who are now joining us for Bits and Bytes, welcome. My name is Nicole Minkese. I'm with the Long Island Library Resources Council. I normally have a background for that, but unfortunately, I couldn't find it in time, and then I just didn't want to waste our time here today with Kristen. I'm going to briefly introduce our guest today. This is Kristen Nyitray. She is with Stony Brook University. She has many titles at Stony Brook University. Among them, she is the archivist for University Archives. And Kristen's going to talk a little bit about some of the fantastic things that they have there at Stony Brook University. I'm going to go ahead and take a couple of minutes while we're kind of warming up and people are logging in and talk just briefly about New York Heritage and why we're doing this series. I'm going to share my screen for just a quick second here. New York Heritage, some of you are probably already familiar with this website. It's actually, I've kind of pulled this up because this is a visual that's on our website, kind of under the kind of explaining who we are and what we do with New York Heritage. These are the 9 councils of the, basically, I'm working on the Long Island Region Council, but these are the 9 councils that make up what we call the Empire State Library Network. And together we have combined all of our individual websites into this one resource. And it's been around now for, I think it was 2012 when the consolidation happened. And for those of you who are familiar with the website, it's nyheritage.org. You can find all manner of digital archives here. We've got images, we've got oral histories. There are some film footage here. So it's a fantastic resource. It covers the entire state of New York. There's some really fun like browsing capabilities here if you just want to see some random items from collections, but you can also see our monthly featured collections, or you can just use the search box and maybe just type in something kind of fun. So for example, typing in Roosevelt, you'll get images and documents and archival materials, even ephemera, from everywhere from Buffalo to Albany and Oyster Bay. So you can see how with one search, you can get a lot of great hits from all over the state. So we're kind of a one-stop shop. And that is my pitch for New York Heritage. I'm going to get back out of here and stop sharing and let Kristen take over because she's got the really interesting stuff right now. Kristen, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself as well?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for your interest in learning about our George Washington Spy Letters at Stony Brook University. My title is on the bottom here. It's I'm associate librarian. I'm director of special collections in University Archives and University Archivist at Stony Brook University. I'm also a certified archivist through the Academy as a certified archivist, and I have my DAS certification, digital archivist specialization from the Society of American Archivists. So a lot of, and also, very involved in community events and things of that nature. So I want to thank Nicole for inviting me and for the opportunity to highlight and draw attention to our spy letters at Stony Brook. And I'm really a fan of New York Heritage. I think it's a really important repository and database for collections that document New York, and you can do research in local, statewide, and broader historical context. So I really think it's a fabulous resource. Can I start?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And sorry, really quick too, folks, if you have questions for Kristen, just pop them into the chat box and I will read them off. And if we need to, you can raise your hand as well. Maybe if you have a lengthier question. So just feel free to ask away and we'll get to those questions at the end. Okay, Kristen, thanks. Take it away.
Sure. So today I'm going to provide an overview. We're really fortunate to have two letters at Stony Brook University. One was written in 1779 and one in 1780. And I want to discuss, so I was telling Nicole, I'm going to, in 10 minutes, do the whole history of the spy ring, just set the context for the letters. And then I'm going to discuss their history, acquisition, outreach, and endeavors that we do, content, and the significance. And I also want to briefly explain the measures we took to ensure that they are preserved for future generations. And then some of the considerations and decisions that were made for digitization, which in turn, of course, enhances the discoverability and the impact of them. Whoops. So really briefly, Stony Brook University is a public research university and one of the 4 SUNY centers. Special Collections and University Archives is part of the university libraries, and we are the largest repository of its type in Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island. And a core collecting area for us is Long Island history. Everything from maps, the map in my background as well, books, serials, historical photos, and everything in between. It is a core collecting area for us. The scope of our activities are outreach, engagement, digitization, cataloging, I'm trying to think, fundraising and outreach. It's a really active department. In terms of staffing, we have 2 FTE, I'm one of the 2, and also the department webmaster. So I really encourage you all to visit our website. The URL is here at the top to learn about what we do in special collections and university archives. So last fall, as Nicole knows, I reacquainted myself with Content DM, which was an interesting experience, but also so important that we have a presence in this huge collective to showcase our collections. And I wanted to point out the 4 that we've added up to this point. So counterclockwise. Can you see my arrow, Nicole?
I sure can. We sure, yeah.
Okay, great. So we have the Charles Henry Miller digital collection, which are etchings of New York and Long Island from the mid to late 19th century. As a lot of archives, special collections have done, we've digitized our postcard collection. We have a collection featuring materials from our university archives, materials that document the history of Stony Brook University. And the collection where the George Washington letters are housed or placed is the Long Island Digital Collection. And then really brief, just before I delve into the letters, Stony Brook and Stony Brook University is situated 60 miles east of New York City on the North Shore of Long Island. And this is the exact location that was the hub of activity for the Culper Spy Ring during the American Revolution. The ring was based in the Three Village area, which today comprises the hamlets of Stony Brook, Setauket, and the village of Oldfield. It's actually 2 hamlets and a village, but it's called the Three Village area. And you can really glean from looking at this map why Setauket and Stony Brook was so conducive for intelligence gathering and sharing with its proximity here to New York City and also the immediate access here to the Long Island Sound. So this excerpt is from our 1779 letter, which illustrates the importance of Setauket in George Washington's efforts to gather intelligence. Here, Washington is writing to Major Benjamin Tallmadge, and he's focusing his attention on a spy called Culper Jr. And he states here, quote, "He may write a familiar letter on domestic affairs or on some little matters of business to his friend at Setauket or elsewhere, interlining with the stain his secret intelligence," unquote. So here in his very own words, Washington reveals hints, and he calls them hints himself, for covertly obtaining information and suggests the use of invisible ink. And Washington was profoundly involved in giving directives on handling spies, suggesting methods of spycraft, and orchestrating how to pass along intelligence without detection. So George Washington and the emergence of the Culper Spy Ring, I rely upon his intelligence. So I think it's really important to acknowledge and to recognize the relationships between Washington, Tallmadge, and Nathan Hale. In 1776, Washington was desperate to get information about what was happening inside British-occupied New York City. Hale volunteered to spy on September 8th, 1776. However, he was untrained. And unfortunately, during his very first mission, he was captured. British General William Howe personally interrogated Hale and ordered his execution. So he volunteered on the 8th. On the 22nd, he was marched in Manhattan to the area of present-day 66th Street and 3rd Avenue and was hanged. And pictured here on the right, this is actually an original British record housed at Yale, which described the event. quote, "A spy for the enemy by his own full confession apprehended last night was this day executed at 11 o'clock in front of the artillery park," unquote. So the tragic death of Hale compelled Washington to become more methodical and strategic in activities surrounding espionage. Setauket, born and raised Benjamin Tallmadge, was a dear friend of Nathan Hale. They were actually classmates at Yale. And a month before Hale's execution, Tallmadge fought the Battle of Long Island, and he lost his brother William. William actually starved to death in a British prison. So for Tallmadge, war was business, but it was also extremely personal. Within 2 years, in 1778, Washington appointed Tallmadge as his chief intelligence officer, spurring the formation of the Culper Spy Ring. And today, we know members of the ring included Tallmadge's trusted friends and family in Setauket: Abraham Woodhull, Caleb Brewster, Anna Strong, and Austin Rowe. And none of them were ever really spies during their lifetimes. Abraham Woodhull was a farmer from Setauket and lived in a constant state of anxiety about being discovered as a spy. By the summer of 1779, Woodhull recruited Robert Townsend of Oyster Bay to serve as the ring's primary spy in New York City. Townsend wrote his reports as Samuel Culper Jr., and Woodhull went by Samuel Culper Sr. And this illustration provides a visual for how the intelligence was transmitted. And this was the typical route. You had Robert Townsend here in Lower Manhattan. He would pass the information to Austin Rowe, who would ride it on horseback to around his tavern in Setauket. He would give it to Abraham Woodhull and Anna Strong. It would then be passed on to Caleb Brewster, who would, in his whaleboat, ferry it here across the Long Island Sound to Fairfield, Connecticut, where Benjamin Tallmadge was located, and then it would be brought over to Washington, and Washington was headquartered in Bergen County, West Point. They would bring it to wherever he was positioned at the time. So between 1778 and 1783, the Culper Spy Ring used several innovative methods of spycraft. And this is a letter from Tallmadge to Washington on July 25th, 1779. And Tallmadge states, quote, "Enclosed is a scheme for carrying on correspondence in future with Culper," unquote. And the enclosure was 4 pages long. And this is a section of page 4. And this image is courtesy of the Library of Congress. So what this was Tallmadge created this numerical dictionary that had 760 words, cities, and names. And some people were also given aliases. So if you see here, this is John Bolton. This was Benjamin Tallmadge, but he was 721. You have Woodhull, 22, Townsend, 723, Austin Rowe. You also have here Setauket as 729. So all of the, essentially everything having to do with Setauket and the Culper Spy Ring was clustered in the 720s. Also, George Washington was number 711, which is very easy to remember. So this was crucial, another tool that they used to gather and pass along the intelligence. The other thing they used was invisible ink, which they called the sympathetic stain. And this letter is in the Washington papers, and it looks like it's damaged, but that's because of the reagents. So they would write with one chemical and the writing would disappear, and then they would put another chemical on it, and that would reveal handwriting. And this was developed by James J., who was a physician and a brother of the statesman John J. So Washington placed great reliance on Townsend, and the Culper Spy Ring has been credited by historians for aiding the war effort in many significant ways. For example, they thwarted a plot to attack when French fleets were going to be under attack. They also found out that the British had actually gotten hold of reams of paper, and they were going to counterfeit money. The other thing they did was they revealed treasonous communications between Benedict Arnold and John Andre. Townsend's double life remained a secret until the 20th century, when historian Morton Pennypacker confirmed that Townsend was indeed Culper Jr. And it was announced, I found out, at the meeting of the New York State Historical Society on September 27th, 1930, and it was reported in the New York Times the very next day. So now that you know everything about the Culper Spy Ring in 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our letters at Stony Brook University. So I'm going to start with our 1779 letter. And this was actually, what happened was we acquired it in May of 2006, but actually first went up for auction months earlier in November 2005. The letter actually went up for auction, but it didn't meet the minimum reserve price at about $120,000. And pictured here is one side of it. And it was covered by Newsday. So it's one leaf or one sheet, and then it would be folded in half like a booklet and then folded in fours. So that's how the letter would be, positioned and how you would read it. But it's interesting because it was covered by Newsday, and these were some of the bylines. You have Washington letter goes on auction block. It belongs here. Any donors? No deal on Washington spy letter. And at the time, there were a lot of cultural heritage organizations that wanted to buy it. They just did not have $120,000 to go and pursue it. So in winter 2006, acquisition part 1. So we learned that the letter was going to be auctioned again, but with a lower reserve price. And here are some quick facts about the letter. It was written September 24th, 1779. It's to Major Benjamin Tallmadge. It's from General George Washington. It's written from headquarters, West Point. And what's really interesting is there's actually 3 handwritings on this letter. So Washington would often dictate his letters to trusted confidants or aide-de-camps, they were called. So in this letter, the body of the letter is in the hand of James McHenry, who was his aide-de-camp. Washington actually signed it here. This is his signature. And then when Tallmadge received it, he actually docketed it. So that's that writing here. So it says it was sent on the 24th and he received it on the 26th. So it took him 2 days to receive this letter. It was formerly owned by the multimillionaire Malcolm Forbes. He was a collector of motorcycles and Fabergé eggs and Americana. And after his passing, there was a series of auctions of his estate, and this letter was part of it. And the scope of this letter is intelligence, gathering, Culper Jr., and different methods of spycraft. And Washington is very specific. He says use invisible ink. He says write the intelligence in between the lines. So that's where I think the idiom read between the lines comes into play, to understand, write the intelligence in between the lines. He also talks about using very bright paper because that would help the ink to show better. And the other hint he gives is to fold the letter in a particular way. So he would have a visual cue as to whether or not the letter was something more general or would it contain intelligence, and how the letter would be folded would be decided in advance of sending it.
That's fascinating. Actually.
Yeah. So he was he wasn't just saying, you take care of it. He was very direct, and he had his and he called it hints. He said, here, let me give you a further hint. So, when I do a lecture, I could do a whole hour just on analyzing every line of this letter. But again, if you go to our website, you can get kind of that more line by line analysis of the letter. But it's really fascinating to see the insights and his thoughts on spying. What I wanted to say is why we wanted this letter. And these are all examples of secondary sources. So you have Morton Pennypacker's book, you have Washington Spies by Alex Rose, and then you have the book George Washington's Secrets by Brian Kilmeade. And these are all fine works, but you really need the primary sources. And there was no repository in our region that had an original primary source about the spy ring. We also were concerned that this letter would go into private hands and therefore be inaccessible. So we really wanted to make it a true public document. And also the letter really underscores Long Island's and the Three Villages area pivotal role during the American Revolution and the importance of the Culper Spy Ring. And something else that was very important to us was to have a spirit of collaboration in our community. There are so many organizations on Long Island, specifically in the Three Village area, that takes ownership and pride in preserving some facet of Culper Spy Ring history. This is an illustration and an interactive map that's the Emma Clark Library, and we're on it. We're number 10, so people can see, about our letters. But we really, like I said, the goal was to acquire it, digitize it, and then make it as widely accessible as possible. So May 19, 2006, at the auction, it was part of this Forbes collection of historical documents. I was privileged to be the one to bid on, no pressure, but bid on behalf of the university. And it was really exciting. This is not my hand, but this is a representation of the panel that I had at the auction. But it was really an exciting auction. And the problem was that we were lot 31, which early, of course, it was Washington, but everything, pretty much everything prior to our item was going for higher than the valuation. So there was some people were a little bit concerned. And when it got to our lot, there was some back and forth in person on the phone. But in the end, I held the winning paddle for $80,000 on behalf of the university. And then Christie's has this buyer's premium of 20% on top of that, which is like an admin fee. So the total cost for the letter was $96,000. And of course, the local media was very excited and covered it the next day. And then 3 years later, by George Stony Brook got it. A letter written almost a year to the date later, in September 16, 1780, went up for auction as well. And this was part of a major auction. It was focused on Abraham Lincoln. And it was really exciting because, as a side note, the final item was Lincoln's handwritten 1864 victory speech, and it set a record for a historical a worldwide record. It went for $3.4 million. So that was exciting to be at that auction. But we were more excited to get our letter. And it's a little different from our previous letter because instead of it coming from West Point, he's in Bergen County now. There's still the three handwritings, but instead of James McHenry as the aide-de-camp, we figured out it was another one, Tench Tallmadge. The provenance was not disclosed. We did not know who owned it previously. And the scope is different. Instead of giving hints for spying, what's happening is Tallmadge is requesting that they pay Townsend. He had real expenses, from living expenses to caring for his horses, and Washington was in arrears basically. So he needed to get funding, money to Culper Jr. or Townsend. And the other thing that's really intriguing is that Washington suggests that if Culper Jr. wants it, he's willing to give him public recognition. But there were contingencies, things had to go favorably for them. But that is intriguing because, Townsend took his secret to his grave in 1838, and that never came to pass.
Yeah, and this is what's the date of the letter. So there's still several more years of the American Revolution yet.
That's right.
So Tallmadge is saying, yeah. So he's just saying, listen, Culper. Essentially, Culper needs some kind of compensation. Is that what
he needs compensation? Yeah. Also, there was some conversation. The correspondence suggests of Townsend becoming a full-time spy, and Washington says absolutely not. What you're doing is working for us. Keep commingling, and your cover is connections with James Rivington and all these other connections in Lower Manhattan are serving us well. So don't stop doing that. But this was, if you go into Founders Online, which is a great database, a free database, and you read the correspondence, covering this year, you can see Tallmadge has asked repeatedly, like, we need to get him money. So this was kind of like culminating up to this point. So right now, I just want to tell you briefly about some of the conservation and preservation measures we took, which led to the digitization. And this is a direct quote from one of our conservators. The ink is eating the paper, which is a bit concerning, but not uncommon for letters of this era. So we worked with the Conservation Center for Art and Historical Artifacts in Philadelphia, and there were two phases to this because we recognized, we need to have a professional firm assess the condition. And just on the surface, they looked okay, given their age and their history, but we wanted that to be done. So we sent it to Philadelphia, and they actually said it was in fair to poor condition. Mm-hmm. And the primary issues were, here you can see there was paper loss on the side. There were evidence of previous repair work, along the folds, which were no longer effective. But the biggest problem was the ink. The ink was corrosive and actually several hundred years later, still forming holes in the paper. And we had to do something if we wanted to make that stop. And really quickly, this is the ink. Iron gall ink, if you don't know, it's comprised of iron sulfate, which is highly acidic, and tannic acid. They extract that on oak trees. That could be a tumor, and they extract that out, and then they mix it with this gum, and that forms the ink. The writing medium was quill, and the paper was rag or cotton. So the paper was not acidic. Again, the biggest problem was the ink itself. And this is some of the things they did. They did surface cleaning. They flattened it. They actually gave the letter 2 baths to diminish the corrosive, ways that
The
the ink
effects of
was
the
affecting
gall.
the paper, right?
Yeah.
And then they rehumidified it to give it some give. And then finally, what they do is they put the letter in a package, and then they put that package in a frame. And that is to mitigate any issues with temperature and humidity fluctuations and particulate matter and things of that nature. And this is how we have,
Yeah, I was gonna say conservators call it a package.
yes,
We don't, yeah, it's like an odd way, but that's the, you know, the way that they've stacked different materials to get,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, and it stays in this package. It doesn't come out. I mean, you could if you wanted to, but that would kind of undo all that work that's been done. And this is how we have it on display. So because it's a two-side, you know, has two sides, you have to think, how am I going to exhibit this? So there's actually more room here than this photo suggests, but you can walk around it 360 degrees. We have HEPA filters and data loggers and light meters to monitor the environmental conditions. So now moving on to digitization, which is so important. We really think it's important to have representation in New York heritage. And so we took the images that were, the photographs that were taken by the Conservation Center, and those are what you'll see in New York Heritage. But with any digital collection, you really have, you know, it's such an investment of time and resources to create one digital item. And
Right.
you have to think of the whole life cycle, you know, before you turn the scanner on, how are you going to save it and migrate it and refresh it and make sure it's, a, you know, it has a longevity. So there's a lot to consider in the planning. I'm a big proponent of planning and having documents and documentation about different projects. But some of the rationale was the collection scope. So yes, this letter absolutely fits within our scope. The research value, the potential impact, preservation, will it certainly benefit from not being handled for security reasons. Of course, you want to digitize it. You will incredibly increase access. People from around the world now will have, you know, the ability to view this letter themselves. I also feel that digitization as a form of academic engagement, community engagement is a great tool, is a great way to start networking and learning about each other's collections. And then in terms of creating the records themselves, the image files, you know, what file format might be best for the, you know, sometimes it might be a PDF, sometimes it might be a JPEG. You have to decide that. What kind of metadata, how descriptive are you going to get? And then also, are you going to have other information that's going to aid the researcher? So for example, transcripts, provenance notes, things of that nature. One of the big, you know, an important decision was like, how are we going to display this, you know, in an online environment, a two-sided letter? Because like I mentioned, it's one page with two sides. So, you know, so for example, the right side here is part 1, the end of the letter is part 4, on the back is 2 and 3. So this wouldn't make, if someone starts here, they're not going to understand the flow of the letter. So my solution was to do both. Right. So in the record, I've, you know, have the 4, so you can read it in the sequence. I have the 4 thumbnails, and then I also have the sheets here. So there's actually 6 image files in this one record. And I wanted to explain that in the notes field. And so that was what I did. I included a note that says this digital item has 6 parts. Images 1 through 4 are cropped images to align with the transcript. 5 and 6 show each side of the leaf. The original letter was folded like a booklet. So that's kind of the solution that I think serves this item the best. And the other wonderful thing, of course, about digitization is you can really zoom in and you can see the chain lines and you can kind of see the differences in the handwriting. So again, here is Tallmadge's handwriting. Here's James McHenry, headquarters West Point, 24th September 1779. And here's George Washington's signature, G.O. Washington. So impact, collections, research, engagement, outreach. Because of this letter, we were able to start a fund where we were able now to acquire and preserve other letters. So it really helped us to refocus our collecting and also spur digitization for us. So we were able to get letters of a relative of Abraham Woodhull, Nathaniel Woodhull, George Clinton, who was the first governor of New York. This is another letter in New York Heritage. It's actually written to Thomas Jefferson when he was Secretary of State, and Clinton is relinquishing the land in Montauk for the purpose of building the Montauk Lighthouse. We also were really lucky to find a letter written by James J, who invented the invisible ink. And in this letter, James is asking for compensation for what he did. So he never got it. But these are all things that now that we have them, and now that we have this platform in New York Heritage, we can put it out there and people can discover them and use them in their own research. In terms of traditional outreach, I mean, the letter makes trips out. So this is one of our first trips to Setauket Elementary School. You can see we have reenactors. It was a great day. Because of the letters, we have been helpful in others' efforts to, install historical markers. For example, there's one in Stony Brook now, right outside the bounds of campus, that commemorates when Washington came back in 1790 to thank the spies at Austin Rose. Every year we have Culper Spy Day now for this past several years. Last year it was virtual, and we usually have an open house where you can come to the department, but last year I gave a lecture, and we can point now to the digital letters and people can download them through our website. And here's an example of media. I've done podcasts and interviews. This was News 12 on Long Island. But what's important, again, bringing it back to digitization, is they always have, like on News 12, they say to learn more, go to numbers and links or something. So you can always give the reporter or give whoever you're speaking to a link to New York Heritage and say, listen, anyone can look at this. It's open to the public. If you can't come in person, go to this website and excuse me, not only can you find our letters, you can find other incredible cultural heritage collections through New York Heritage. And the culmination of all this is that new research and scholarship can be formed. And we help, all age groups, all people from across the country, across the world, actually. So everything from National History Day, Discovery Channel, to authors who are known in their fields can now access our letters remotely through New York Heritage. The other thing that's important to note is that it really helps to influence the way you interpret history. You need these primary sources. It's fine, of course, to read the secondary sources to understand that, but through New York Heritage, you can get direct access. People always ask me about Turn, in my opinion on Turn. I think it's fine. I don't see it as one, good or bad or anything like that. I think it provides a platform for further discussion about it. But I really think having the original source material, it really elevates the study, and it brings, and again, people can access it for themselves and form their own opinions.
I think Turn is a little bit like The Crown, where it's based on real people, but they take a lot of license and
right.
But
again, it actually brought attention to it. So it served a purpose. And actually during that period when Turn was on, there were a lot of people traveling to the community for tourism. And people would want to come to Stony Brook, and then they would go to Stony Brook Village, and then they would go to the Free Village Historical Society. So it really created, and Raynham Hall and other places, and East Hampton Library, places that have other, associated materials. So I think it really helped attention to the history.
Yeah,
here.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think there's some joy in maybe learning something like, there's a disappointment. Anna Strong really wasn't, whatever, involved or whatever with Whittle. However, maybe that's a disappointment. But then if there's the thrill of the hunt and the chase and the finding of the real documents and learning the real histories, and especially for younger students, that passion kind of gets started right then and there, and then it's carried on. It's a lifetime learning experience, and falling in love with primary sources as soon as you can get your kids in there into historical societies and museums. It's just so important for for all of our development, down
right.
So I should go ahead and continue with your.
No, I have just one more slide, but I would add to that, particularly in the Three Village area where we are, I work closely with the Historical Society. I am not able to go into all the schools, but that is what they're like an emphasis of theirs in doing walking tours. So they can use our letter, and then I can refer people to them. So it creates these great synergies amongst all these different heritage, because no one can do everything. There's more than enough for every one of us to do, and we really don't want to duplicate our efforts, but we can use that same document or that same diary or something as a starting point and kind of develop it in different unique ways. One of the final things I'll say is it's really important to have, I think, multiple access points to your digital collections. So we have the actual item in New York Heritage, but we want people to also find it through our own catalog. So we create MARC records. So we have it, our local catalog is called Search. So we have, if you go to our local catalog, there'll be a link to New York Heritage. We also have a record in WorldCat, of course, and then that record in WorldCat gets harvested and put in another fantastic database called Archive Grid. So it harvests the records from WorldCat, particularly like manuscript collections. And then it's just, you know, if you Google Archive Grid, it'll come right up, and it searches collections across the country. And what's great is you can kind of sort them by region or by, you know, subject headings. There's a lot of different ways you can use faceted searches to refine your results. And also, like I mentioned earlier, the website of Special Collections is really a gateway to our department and our collections. I also have on the page under Special Collections a specific section just for the Washington letters. So there's finding aids, there's the history of how we got them, the preservation measures I go into a bit more in depth on the website. And then also at Stony Brook, we use LibGuides, and this is the LibGuide for George Washington and the Culper Spy Ring. So again, there's a tab that will lead you to New York Heritage. We have information on turn. We have things, you know, I have a tab about the, you know, using codes and aliases. It's kind of a portal, a one-stop shopping. I have links to other repositories, and it's one of our most accessed web pages. So I maintain it. There's always things coming out. You know, I have Google alerts so I can see what's come out. But this is, I think, a very helpful starting point if you're interested in learning more about the history of the Culper Spy Ring.
That's great, because I do get a lot. I've got some questions about that. I think anybody who works in a library on Long Island will eventually get an email from somebody,
yes,
California, Alaska, wherever, looking for some kind of information. And I think pointing them to that LibGuide is going to be really, really helpful and save everybody a lot of time. And, you know, again, just making those good connections.
I mean, right. And not everyone can travel to Long Island. It's expensive. It's an investment. If they happen to be visiting, that's wonderful. If they live local, that's fine, but not everyone can do that. And people also ask, can I pay for a scan? And we don't charge. It's just download it, use it. We ask that if you use it in a publication or some other instance, you cite us, of course. But they're there to be discovered and enjoyed and read and learned from. So we don't create any barriers to the access for our documents. I'm trying to, I think that's everything. Yeah, so I was just going to say, I wanted to just share my contact information. So if you have a question today or something comes to mind later on, please feel free to email me. I'm always happy to field questions and impart what I know, or, you know, direct you to further resources for research on this topic.
So that's the Culper Spy Ring in a nutshell. But also, we're again with just New York Heritage in general. You know, you and I started working kind of again on that just in the last year or so, and it's been great because, you know, it was one of those things where it just kind of was on pause for a little bit. You had a presence, you kind of came back and sort of saw the value in it. And we've been doing that a lot on Long Island. And I think I can probably speak for most of my colleagues around the state, is that, you know, some of these relationships, you know, people get busy, things happen, but the nice thing about New York Heritage is that it's there and you can always just kind of re-up and just kind of step right back in right where you left off.
Right.
Some questions I want to make.
Yeah, I see one of the questions about the transcripts. I have the transcripts on the website, and I have a transcript field within New York Heritage. So there are transcripts available for both letters. Most of the letters that we upload will have a transcript associated with them.
Yeah, I was thinking also, like, you know, Library of Congress and the National Archives usually have transcripts of all the documents. You know, if you look, you had the George Washington papers there, that was Library of Congress, right?
Right. But what's interesting is that there were what happened was there would be an original letter sent and then a copy made in a ledger. And I did a comparison of the ledger and our letter, and they're not identical. It may just be like 3 words difference, but they're not the same. So it's important to look at that and then compare it to the original if you have access. A lot of you can access Washington's papers through Founders Online.
Oh, yeah,
And what's wonderful about that site is that it puts a lot of the letters in context. So it'll give you great footnotes. It'll also situate that letter with the letter before it and after it, so you can understand the context where it falls within, that week or that, couple of days.
One of our local, another participant from New York Heritage was wondering, Kristen, if you uploaded the letter as a compound object, but I think that's how you did probably, right?
No, I did it as a PDF. I made it a PDF. I thought it was easier to scroll, but I could have done it that way as well, for sure. And going back to your point, Nicole, about like being away, I'm not in like the digital projects division, but that said, with my experience and the person that works with me, we work collaboratively on kind of creating the best record we can. I want people to know, not to feel like you have to do 50 items at once. Sometimes I do 1 a week. I mean, and that's all I can do because I have a lot going on. But, you choose an item and you make it the best you can and then you move on. So I think it's more about the quality, and making sure the metadata is great and you use that's the other thing I really appreciate about New York Heritage, the controlled vocabulary. I think it's like very intuitive. So even if you're not expert in content DM, use a spreadsheet. Start with that. Create your fields. We share a Google Sheet. Fill it in, tweak it, and then upload it. And then if you change your mind, or if you want to, I take things down all the time. I didn't know really initially how long it took to index an item, so I'll hit index, I'll go make dinner and come back and and for me as well, it's a lot of trial and error. Sometimes it's just a comma, it's something that's like, oh, I didn't realize that was going to make that look different. But you go back and you change it, or I email Nicole, and she who's wonderful about being available and very responsive. But I think like anything is a contribution. So I started to add maps. I'm trying photographs, like different formats as well. I haven't done sound yet. That's something I'm interested in doing as well.
Yeah.
But
we've got some phenomenal oral histories. And what's nice about histories is you've got the image of the person, you've got the video, either the video or the audio file, and then you have a transcript that's hopefully pretty accurate. And that's just all in one nice little neat package that you can search, and you can search across so many different fields. So you don't have to really go nuts and reinventing, or just repeating yourself. You can just kind of have some just the key fields and a great description.
You know what I just did yesterday? I was looking at the controlled vocabulary, and I said, I want to see the whole thing. I think right now you scroll through it. I do it. So I made my own document with all of the headings, so I can kind of just see what's available. But I think there's so much, it really is very expansive. I think you'll have no problem finding a term to fit your document or your letter, it's very comprehensive as well.
Yeah, I mean, and for those of you, I know it's about time we wrap it up. We're right on time, so we're perfect. In fact, I was thinking, so if you've got any other questions, folks, jump on in really quick before we log off here. Technically, we've got a little extra time here to share, just in case we do have a little pop of questions. But anybody that is out there in whether you are here on Long Island with us, or you are somewhere else upstate, or in the metropolitan New York area, if you're interested in joining up with New York Heritage, reach out to nyheritage.org and go to contributors, and there's a list of actually that one web page that I showed earlier, the one with the breakout of the regions. There's another section there that will give you the contacts for those regions. So if you're in the Capital District or Northern New York, someone wanted to know if you would be willing to share the slides that you put together.
Well, the only thing, my only hesitation is that I have images from newspapers and things like that that are not copyrighted. But let
Yeah.
me think about that. Let me think about if I could edit it or do something that wouldn't.
Okay, to whomever asked that question, if you want to reach out to me, if there's something specific that Kristen had on her, maybe it was one of her resource pages or something like that, I'll
Sure.
can communicate that with you and we can get that to you if that's what you were interested in. And yeah, we did, someone did ask about oral histories. There are many oral histories, and some of the ones I'm most proud of to have are from this region, from to some, excuse me, well, they're passed away now, but the remembrances of Tuskegee Airmen and some other really fascinating, you know, World War II pilots and people that worked at Grumman. And, you know, I mean, we just got such a tremendous history here on the island for building planes and whatnot. So anyway, yeah, we certainly have those oral histories online. And so many wonderful things to take a look at. And like I said, you know, you're just typing in something like Roosevelt and you end up with 9,000 hits from all over the state. So, and you can certainly use the advanced search capability to narrow your focus. There's a lot you can do.
I would say, I would add, you know, a couple of years ago, I wrote a book about beaches on Long Island, and New York Heritage was my go-to site. I mean, I found booklets and pamphlets and of course postcards as well, but it really, you know, for organizations that don't have a web presence or they can't do original cataloging, New York Heritage provides, you know, accessibility to all this content that you wouldn't find otherwise. So you never know what you, like you said, it's kind of serendipity, but then you're like, wow, I didn't know that this existed.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to find. And then it's almost like going through, you know, the library itself, the bookshelves. You go to pick out one book, and thanks to the, you know, the way things are outlined, you can find something similar that you didn't, or a similar topic, but without that you would never known to find. So, okay.
And I would just say I was really inspired by our colleagues on our committee, our local history committee, because they've done such wonderful collections for 20 years now. You know, they've been building these collections. So another thing I would say is you can really learn a lot from your, you know, neighbors. And if you want to do an oral history or do a map, go in and see how they construct the record. I think, you know, there's a lot of knowledge that people in your community can impart with you with how to craft these records. And I think it's like very supportive. You know, working with Nicole and the committee members, if you had a question or if you're having an issue or a technical problem, they're very helpful in that way. So I think it's like a great, like I said, a spirit of community, and we can all help each other to get this content made available.
We definitely have a strong local history community here on the island, and there's several people that are incredibly active, you being one of them. And I think that's a great, you know, stopping point. I'm really glad we had this conversation, and thank you so much, Kristen, for, you know, the work that you put into this presentation. I really appreciate that, and for all the kind words about New York Heritage, because, you know, I think it's a great deal, if you will, for anybody small or large to have a presence online. That is kind of one of those things where, you know, you don't have, I think a lot of people want to put their stuff out online, and it's intimidating and it's expensive and it's a lot of work. And so, you know, we're here at the councils to help you with that. So reach out if you're interested. And thank you so much again, Kristen. Thanks for everybody who showed up today. I think we got a lot of thank yous. You can see some of those in the chat that they found this very interesting, and it is interesting. So I guess that's going to do it for us. Kristen and I will see you at the next committee meeting. Everybody out there, stay safe. Thanks again for joining us, and look for the next Bits and Bytes, which we'll probably have within the next coming months from one of our other marketing committee members. So signing off for New York Heritage, this is Nicole Manchese from the Long Island Library Resource Council, Kristen Nyitray from Stony Brook University. Everyone have a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much.